I let my coworker touch me, the way my husband hadn't in years. He handed me divorce papers and left. Hello, Reddits. My name is Megan, and I'm 33 years old. I've been married to my husband, Chris, for the past 8 years. We have 2 beautiful kids, a girl and a boy, Joanne and Dave. My husband, Chris, is the kind of man most people would envy, a good husband in every way that counted. Chris is the most reliable human being I have ever met, the kind of person who would never let you down, no matter what life threw at you. He loved me deeply, and I know he would have done anything to make me happy. He was literally the perfect husband, and I really loved him very much. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing him for who he was. I stopped appreciating what we had and started focusing on everything I thought was more important. When Chris and I first got married, I thought I had found the kind of love people dream about. Those early years were filled with laughter, excitement, and the kind of passion that made everything else in the world fade away. We couldn't keep our hands off each other, and even the smallest moments, like cooking dinner together or cuddling on the couch, felt special. Chris had this way of making me feel like I was the center of his universe, and I loved every second of it. But life has a way of sneaking up on you. The bills, the house, the responsibilities, they started piling up, and little by little the spark we had in the beginning began to dim, especially after having our kids. Things had been normal after we gave birth to Joanne, but right after Dave came, things just became really different between us. Not that Chris loved me any less or stopped showing me that he did, but things were just different. Chris threw himself into his work, determined to give us the kind of future he thought we deserved. He worked long hours, coming home late most nights, exhausted, but still trying his best to keep things running smoothly. I know he thought he was doing the right thing, but with every hour he spent at the office, I felt the distance between us grow. Our conversations became transactional, what bills needed to be paid, what groceries we needed, what the kids had going on at school. Date nights became a distant memory, replaced by evenings spent on opposite ends of the couch, scrolling through our phones or half-watching TV. Even our intimacy started to feel like an afterthought, something we did out of routine rather than desire. Chris was always gentle, always considerate, but it felt like he was going through the motions, like he wasn't fully present. He still spent time with the kids, and they adore him very much. He is a present father, but I just felt something wasn't right with us. At first, I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that it was just a phase, but deep down, I started to feel invisible. I never told Chris how I was feeling. I didn't want to seem ungrateful or needy, especially when I knew how hard he was working, but the loneliness was crushing, and the more I tried to suppress it, the more it grew. I started to wonder if this was just what marriage was. 2 people coexisting, doing their best to get through the day, but no longer truly connecting. I missed the way he used to look at me, the way he used to make me feel like I was the only person in the world that mattered. And when I didn't get that from him, I started looking for it elsewhere. Dylan. Dylan was transferred to our branch from another branch. He had apparently requested the transfer because he wanted change. I didn't even really notice him at first other than as a coworker. Dylan wasn't someone I ever thought I'd be attracted to. He was younger than me by a few years, with a cocky, confident demeanor that I usually found off-putting. But there was something about the way he carried himself, the way he always seemed to know exactly what to say to make people laugh or feel at ease. He was charming in a way that felt effortless, like he didn't even have to try. At first, our interactions were nothing more than casual workplace banter. We worked on a few projects together, and he had a way of making even the most mundane tasks feel less tedious. He'd crack jokes, compliment my ideas, and always seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. I didn't think much of it at first, and I told myself he was just being friendly, that this was how he treated everyone. But as the weeks went on, I started to notice the way his attention lingered on me a little longer than it did with anyone else. I'd be lying if I said I didn't like it. After years of feeling invisible at home, having someone notice me, really notice me, was intoxicating. Dylan had this way of making me feel seen, like I wasn't just another cog in the machine, but someone worth paying attention to. He'd compliment my outfits, laugh at my jokes, and find little ways to keep the conversation going long after the workday was over. It was harmless, I told myself, just a little attention to brighten my day. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It all came to a head one evening when Dylan and I stayed late to finish a project. The office was quiet, the usual buzz of phones and chatter replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights. I remember feeling nervous, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. It wasn't unusual for us to work late. I even called Chris to inform him that I would be home late so he could settle the kids. But there was something about being alone with him. Being alone with Dylan in the stillness of the office that made my heart race. As we worked, the conversation drifted away from the project and into more personal territory. We talked about our families, our childhoods, the things that made us who we were. He was easy to talk to, and before I knew it, I was telling him things I hadn't shared with anyone in years. There was an intimacy to it, a vulnerability that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. At some point, I reached for a pen on the desk, and our hands brushed. It was such a small thing, barely worth noticing, but the electricity of that touch sent a jolt through me. Dylan didn't pull away. Instead, he placed his hand over mine, his touch lingering just long enough to make it clear that it wasn't an accident. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow, and for a moment, I froze. I should have pulled away. I should have said something, anything, to stop what was happening, but I didn't. When his hand moved to my shoulder, I felt my resolve crumble. His touch was warm, firm, but gentle, and it was like every ounce of the attention and validation I'd been craving was suddenly right there, within reach. I didn't stop him when he leaned in, his breath warm against my skin, or when his lips brushed against mine. I kissed him back, letting the weight of my loneliness and frustration melt away in the heat of that moment. What started as a kiss quickly escalated. Before I knew it, we were tangled together on the couch in the break room, our hands exploring, our breaths ragged. The logical part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, to think about what I was doing, but I ignored it. All I could think about was how alive I felt, how wanted. Dylan's touch was everything I hadn't realized I was missing. Urgent, passionate, and unrelenting. We didn't stop until we had crossed every line imaginable. In the quiet of that empty office, we gave in completely. He rammed into me in ways my husband had never, or should I say hadn't, in a long while. It was messy and rushed, but in that moment, it felt like the most exhilarating thing I'd ever experienced. We didn't even take up to a whole 10 minutes. 1 minute he was inside me while I was bent against my desk, with my skirt lifted high above my waist and my panties down, and then the next minute, he was pulling out after a rushed orgasm. Both of us were breathing really hard. For the first time in years, I felt desirable, like I was more than just a wife or a coworker or a mother. I felt like myself again, and it was intoxicating. But the exhilaration didn't last. As soon as it was over, the guilt hit me like a freight train. I sat there, my clothes disheveled, my heart racing, and I couldn't believe what I'd just done. I tried to justify it to myself, to say it was a mistake, a one-time thing that didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and there was no going back. That night, I went home to Chris, and everything felt different. I couldn't look him in the eye without hearing my own lies echoing in my head. Every touch, every word, felt like a reminder of what I'd done, of the betrayal I had committed. I told myself I could keep it a secret, that it didn't have to mean anything, but the guilt was overwhelming. And even though I didn't know it at the time, the cracks I had been trying so hard to hide were about to shatter everything. What I thought was just a moment of weakness, a fleeting escape from my own insecurities, turned out to be the beginning of the end. Dylan and I had sex again. Like the first time wasn't enough. He managed to convince me that he was good enough to make me happy. The happiness I soothed for desperately with my husband and couldn't have, he managed to convince me that he could give me. And I allowed him. I allowed him spun my illusions into reality. The second time, we had been more discreet. It wasn't in the office like the first time. We had met at a hotel room. I lied to Chris that I had another deadline and that I was going to be home late again, and Chris had not said anything. I allowed Dylan remove my clothes again. This time, I was on the bed, and I allowed him touch me in ways that Chris had never done. I let him kiss his way from my neck down my breasts to my navel and then to my vulva. I even clutched his hair as he gave me pleasure like I had never had before. Before that time, I had never allowed anyone go down on me, not even Chris. He had tried whenever we wanted to have sex, but I had always refused. But there I was, lying down there naked and allowing Dylan do things to me that Chris was never allowed to. I let him adjust my body into different positions so he could get good angles to penetrate even deeper into my vulva. I let him slam his sweaty body into mine, and I even moaned while he did these things. And then it was all over. I picked up my clothes silently and just left. I didn't say anything to him. I didn't have to. He had his satisfaction and was feeling smug about it, but instead of the satisfaction and happiness I craved, I felt even more guilty. I had betrayed the sacred wedding vows I made, and not just once, but twice in a row. I went home ashamed and feeling more dirty than the first time. I couldn't understand why I had gone and done it again a second time. And worse still, I didn't know Chris had discovered anything until it was too late. In hindsight, the signs were there, subtle but unmistakable. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and seemed lost in his own thoughts most of the time. But I chalked it up to work stress or the general wear and tear of our routine life. I had convinced myself that he was oblivious to the growing cracks in our relationship, that he hadn't noticed the changes in me, the way I pulled away from his touch, the way I avoided eye contact when we talked. I underestimated him completely. Chris was never the type to raise his voice or demand attention. He was calm, measured, the kind of person who processed things internally before acting. And while that trait had always been a comfort to me, it was also what made his eventual confrontation so devastating. He wasn't going to yell or argue. He wasn't going to plead or bargain. He was going to wait until he had all the pieces in place, and then he was going to deliver the final blow with quiet precision. Chris didn't confront me right away, didn't let on that he knew anything. He still kissed me goodbye before work, still asked about my day, still helped with the kids' homework, and made dinner like he always did. But there was a coldness to his actions, a sense of detachment that I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was projecting my own guilt onto him, but deep down, I think I knew. I just didn't want to face it. And then, one evening, he came home early. I remember being surprised to see him walk through the door before dinner, his face unreadable as he set his bag down on the counter. He asked if we could talk, and I remember my heart beating faster than it usually would. I tried to downplay my reaction to how he looked at me when he came in, and throughout dinner with the kids, I was so nervous I hardly could eat. My mind raced, wondering exactly what it was he wanted to discuss. I hoped it wasn't about Dylan. I had been so careful covering my tracks. Or so I thought. Chris didn't eat with us. He just stayed in his study room until I was done. After settling the kids in bed, I went to find him, and I met him sitting there staring at an empty space. He smiled when he saw me walk in, but something about that smile made me feel very uncomfortable. It wasn't his usual smile whenever he saw me. It was cynical and cold and a bit off. Something about his eyes just told me something was off. He didn't even wait for me to sit down. He asked me directly, "How's Dylan?" I was shocked, and I tried to downplay my reaction so I didn't look suspicious. I asked him how he knew about the new worker in our company, and he laughed then. A short, bitter laugh that sounded so final, like he knew something that I didn't. He then told me he knew everything. He knew everything about Dylan, because he had seen us. That first time. That first I had taken comfort in another man's arm. He had seen us. He had apparently decided to come pick me up that evening. He had even been excited to surprise me at work and take me out on a dinner date, knowing I probably had skipped lunch because I was working. The security guard had let him in because they knew him as my husband. He had gone directly to my office, and instead of surprising me, he had been surprised. He had seen the whole thing. He had seen when Dylan put his hand on my shoulder and when he had leaned in to kiss me and I hadn't pushed him away. He had seen when I had allowed Dylan to slide off my panties and rammed into me against my desk. He had seen everything. He had not said a word. He had simply just turned around and left. Didn't yell or try to punch Dylan for sleeping with his wife. He had simply just left without a word. And there was another fact that I didn't know. He had gone through the text that Dylan had sent me, the text I thought I had deleted. He read them all. The previous ones where we talked about nearly everything, and then the recent one after the whole thing had happened between us. He read the text that Dylan had sent me, appreciating our sexual adventure the second time, and how he was telling me he couldn't wait to have me again. He had known about the second time, and it had been through the texts that Dylan had sent me. I didn't know it at the time, because that night had started just like any other. I had left my phone on the kitchen counter while I went upstairs to fold laundry. It was a careless mistake. I had been so occupied in my thoughts that I didn't know I had not taken my phone. I didn't know that he had seen the text, because he never said anything after seeing the text. I remember coming back downstairs and meeting my phone right where I left it. And after checking through my phone and seeing the text from Dylan, I deleted it immediately, because I thought my secret was still safe. I thought Chris didn't suspect me. But as he sat there narrating everything Elle had ever done, my feet went cold and I couldn't speak. I cheated on our marriage of so many years, and there was no justifying what I did. But still I tried. I tried to speak, to explain, to apologize, but the words caught in my throat. What could I possibly say that would make any of this better? That it didn't mean anything? That I still loved him? That I was sorry? None of it would have mattered. The damage was already done, and we both knew it. He then dropped another bomb on me. He told me that he had sent the screenshot of our chats and the video he recorded of Dylan and I the day he saw us together in the office to our families, and he had also discreetly dropped it off as a mail to my office. He said he felt I didn't deserve mercy not after everything I did to him, and that what he did was quite proper given the gravity of what I had done. He said everyone deserved to know just how disgusting I had behaved. Cheating when I had a family. He spoke so calmly, like he hadn't just told me he just literally destroyed my life. He then pushed a document to me. I didn't even have to check it to guess what it was. Divorce papers. He wanted me to sign them, and he told me that he wanted nothing to do with me ever again. He wanted custody of our kids, and he said that he didn't want to file for a custody lawsuit because he wanted to leave the decision of whether or not they wanted to see me to our kids when they grew up. And then he left. He packed a small bag and informed me that he would pick up the kids in the morning, and then he just left. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the papers in front of me. Hours, maybe. I just kept replaying the moment over and over in my head. The look on his face as he told me he was leaving, the sound of his footsteps fading as he walked out the door. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the air had been sucked out of the room. And in that moment, I realized how much I had lost. Chris wasn't coming back, and it was all my fault. That night was the beginning of the end. It was the moment I fully understood the gravity of what I had done, the consequences of my actions. I had taken for granted the love of a man who had done nothing but give me his best, and I had thrown it all away for something fleeting and meaningless. And now I'm left with nothing but the wreckage of a life I can never rebuild. The night Chris handed me the divorce papers was the last time I saw him. He had been true to his words and had sent his brother to pick up the kids in the morning. I couldn't even object. His brother had looked at me with disgust. He didn't smile at me and tease me like he often did whenever he came around. He just silently packed up the essential things the kids needed, and he left with them. The house felt really empty after they left. I was left alone to face the nemesis of my actions. I couldn't even comprehend what had happened. The first call I received that day was from my mom, and then my siblings, then my friends. I couldn't bring myself to pick up any of the calls. I knew what they would say, and I had no response, no excuse of some sort to put up. It was clear who was at fault. It was me. It's been 2 days since that horrible night that Chris left, but not before shattering every illusion I had. And I haven't stepped out of the house or picked any calls. I didn't even go to work or answer any of the emails requesting that I show up for an emergency board meeting. I knew I was going to be fired for misconduct. I didn't want to have to face anyone, not after what I have done. So here I am, pleading and begging desperately for some sort of help. Is there any way to salvage the situation? Is there any way I could get Chris to forgive me and look at me the way he once did? Is there any way I can get my life back on track? This is a plea from a desperate wife and mother. Update. Hello, Reddits. It's been 3 weeks since my last post. Since Chris handed me the divorce papers. The reality of it all has finally sunk in. He's gone, and he's not coming back. I've replayed that night over and over in my head, wishing I could rewind time, wishing I had done something, anything, differently. But no amount of wishing can change what I've done or erase the damage I've caused. But then that wasn't all. I thought my life had fallen apart, but turns out all that happened previously was only child's play. I eventually turned up at work, and I sat in front of all of the people that had once respected me and encouraged me. I sat in front of all of them who now look at me with so much scorn. The eyes and whispers when I arrived at the office and as I walked by made my legs wobble, but I managed to get to my office and then I received the call. The one I had already expected. I knew what they were going to say, but I still went anyway, perhaps in hopes that they'll overlook my sins and give me a second chance because of all my years of hard work. Dylan sat right next to me. He was rigid and it was obvious he was vexed. He pleaded not guilty. He lied right there in front of me that I was the one who seduced him and not the other way round. He lied that he tried to stop me, but I had been so adamant and he had eventually given way to me. He twisted the story to make it look like I was the evil monster and the slut who seduced her coworker despite being married. I couldn't even defend myself. I sat there and watched him spin the truth. I already had enough to deal with. This was nothing compared to losing my family. But as I watched him lie, tears spilled down my face. That was the first moment I had cried. Not because he was lying, but because I had been such a fool. I couldn't believe that I allowed someone as twisted and as disgusting as that to seduce me into losing my entire world. I couldn't believe that I had let Dylan, who was an obvious snake, convince me that it was only right that we slept together. Hearing him talk like that stung more than I thought it would. He had been such a big part of the mess I had made, but now he was acting like it had all been one-sided, like I had dragged him into something he didn't want to be a part of. It was humiliating, realizing how little I had meant to him, how disposable I was. Well, we were both fired at the end. Turns out Dylan had not only been a snake to me, but to 2 other women he lied and slept with back at the other branch. Apparently, it was what he was good at. The board found out about his other shenanigans, and they decided it was best to let us both go. I regret letting him into my life and believing he was just what I needed. I should have tried to talk to Chris and sort things out between us, and not take an alternative that has now ruined my entire life. My reputation and family are all gone. I remember the look of disgust across the faces of the junior staff who used to admire me and look up to me as I walked back out of the company that had my many years of hard work. My family also wanted nothing to do with me. My mother had made it very clear that she wanted nothing to do with me. She disowned me completely after getting the evidence that Chris had sent her. My siblings all ignored me too. They wanted nothing to do with me too. I am a big disgrace to the family, and they wanted no part in my shame. I couldn't exactly blame them. I brought everything upon myself. And then there were my friends. The rumor of the affair did not only spread at my workplace and family, but also somehow got leaked to our friends' circle. My friends, people who had always admired our marriage, who used to say we were relationship goals, started pulling away. At first, it was subtle. They stopped inviting me to things, stopped answering my calls as often. Then it became more obvious. One of my closest friends told me outright that she couldn't support what I'd done, that she didn't want to be associated with someone who could betray her husband like that. I tried to explain, to tell her it wasn't as simple as it seemed, but she wasn't interested in hearing my side of the story. It wasn't just my friends. Even people I barely knew seemed to be avoiding me. The neighbors who used to wave as I walked by now looked the other way. The barista at the coffee shop who used to chat with me every morning barely made eye contact. It felt like everyone knew what I had done, and they were all silently judging me. I wanted to scream, to tell them that I wasn't a bad person, that I had just made a mistake. But deep down, I knew they were right. I had betrayed Chris, and there was no excuse for that. I feel like everywhere I go, people talk about me in hushed tones, whispering behind my back. It makes me feel like a pariah, like I don't belong anywhere anymore. It feels almost suffocating stepping out these days. The shame is overwhelming, and some days it's all I can do to drag myself out of bed and get on with the day, hoping it ends, and then going back to bed only to repeat the same circle. In the quiet moments, when the weight of everything feels too heavy to bear, I can't stop thinking about Chris. I think about the life we built together, the moments of joy and love that I took for granted. I think about the way he used to look at me, the way he made me feel safe and cherished, even when things weren't perfect. I had everything I could have ever wanted, and I threw it all away for nothing. I keep asking myself why I did it. Why I let my insecurities and my need for validation drive me to make such selfish, destructive choices. I thought I was chasing something exciting, something that would make me feel alive again, but all I found was regret, emptiness, and the loss of the one person who truly mattered to me. I thought Dylan's attention would fill the void I felt in my marriage, but it only made the cracks deeper, the damage worse. I feel so foolish, so used. I let myself believe that Dylan cared about me, that what we had meant something, but now I see it for what it really was, an escape for both of us. He never had any intention of being there for me when things got hard, and I should have known that from the beginning. I traded the stability and love of a good man for the fleeting attention of someone who never cared about me in the first place, and now I'm left with nothing. If I could go back and undo it all, I would. but then it wouldn't be fair if I just went back like nothing happened. I did do all of the things I'm suffering now, and it would only be fair if I faced the consequences. The divorce papers are still sitting on the dining table, untouched. I've stared at them so many times, my eyes tracing the lines of legal jargon that spell out the end of our marriage. His signature is bold and definitive, a clear sign that he's made his decision. I keep telling myself I'll sign them, that I'll accept the consequences of my actions, but every time I pick up the pen, my hand freezes. It feels so final, so irreversible, and I'm not ready to let go yet. But the truth is, Chris has already let go. Whether I sign the papers or not, he's already moved on in his heart. Staying in the house alone feels tortuous. Everything in the house reminds me of what I had but lost because of my actions. There were still some of Chris's clothes hanging in our closet. They still smell like him. Every inch of the house had a memory of him, and each memory stung and cut even deeper. There were the pictures hanging on the hallway of the house, pictures of the four of us smiling. There was one of just Chris and I. He wrapped his hands around me, and we both looked into the camera, all smiley. Those were beautiful moments. Beautiful moments that would have lasted forever had I not ruined everything. It's so painful living like this. Every day is a constant reminder that I had lost the only people that mattered more to me than anything else in the world. I lost Chris. And I've lost our kids. Tell me, what punishment is greater than that? Update. Hello, Reddits. This may be my last post here. It's been 4 months now, and somehow things keep finding new ways to get worse. I finally signed the divorce papers. There was nothing else I could do. It's obvious that there was no changing what I did. Or Chris's reaction to it. I thought the pain of losing Chris would dull over time, but it hasn't. If anything, it's only gotten sharper, more unbearable. And now, I've learned something that feels like the final blow. Chris is seeing someone new. One of our mutual friends let it slip that he's been spending time with a woman from his gym. The friend probably thought it necessary to give that piece of information, not because she cared, but because she wanted to rub salt all over my wound. She wanted to make me suffer more than I already was suffering, and she was succeeding. The lady that Chris was supposedly seeing was apparently everything I'm not. Fit, confident, glowing with the kind of energy that draws people in. I don't know much about her, but I've pieced together enough from what the friend had said to know that they've been seeing each other regularly. The thought of him smiling at her the way he used to smile at me, of him building a new life with someone else, is devastating. I know I brought this on myself, that I have no right to feel jealous, but I can't help it. It hurts in a way I can't even put into words. What's worse is knowing how quickly he's moved on. I know I shouldn't be surprised because he had every reason to leave me behind, but part of me hoped that he might still be struggling with this, that he might still miss me the way I miss him. Seeing him move forward with his life, building something new while I'm still stuck in the mess I created, makes me feel even more isolated. He's happy, and I'm not. And that's my fault. And there's the fact that our kids will probably see her as a mother figure because I am evidently not in the picture anymore. The kids were evidently happy and comfortable being with their dad. It's obvious just how much their dad meant to them, and I really cannot blame them. The more time I spend away from my kids and Chris, the more I feel like a stranger to them. It feels as if they're moving on so fast without me in the picture, and that makes me regret everything even more. I miss them. I miss them so desperately, and I wish I could just get a chance of just having them in my arms again. I wish so desperately that life gives me second chances, or that I have the opportunity to go in a time machine and undo the wrongs I've done. But life didn't do do-overs now, does it? Life doesn't exactly wait around till you realize your mistakes and then gives you another chance to do things over, right this time. I wish that life was that selfless, but then that would defy all the laws of nature, wouldn't it? What goes around definitely would come around. And in my case, it's my 5 minutes of pleasure in exchange for my entire life. I'm just stuck in the ruthless consequences of my sin. And all I can do now is live with the consequences of my actions and try to figure out how to move forward, even though it feels impossible. The future feels too bleak and empty, and every day that passes by, the pain instead of becoming lesser keeps growing, and it just hurts so badly. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what I've done, or if I'll ever stop missing Chris and the life we had together. I broke us, and I will never stop regretting that fact. To anyone reading this, please don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't let your insecurities or boredom lead you to destroy something precious. Don't take the people who love you for granted, because once they're gone, you'll realize too late how much they meant, and by then, it will be too late to fix anything. Trust me, regret will haunt you every single day. It's not worth it. Thanks and goodbye.